my final fix is to connect a 1000 microfarad capacitor in parallel here with the VCC and ground, and feed it with a 3.3 volt supply, and on the input of the power supply I've got the 24 volts, which is coming through the power over Ethernet from the power injector here. So I've put 0 volts onto that pin there, and 24 volts from that pad right there. So yeah, you don't need that capacitor there for it to run. That's for the 5 volts for probably the serial or something like that. And you probably don't need that capacitor because I've put a 1000 microfarad capacitor on the 3.3 volt line here, but I've got it there anyway, a replacement one, and it seems to be working again. Got the LAN light, got the power light, good to go. So I've got this APC Propeller 2 that's been power cycling, switching off and on continuously. So I've cut it open with the hacksaw. The lights just keep going like this over and over and over. Found out that you've got a 3.3 volt capacitor here and a 5 volt capacitor here. Both capacitors don't hold their capacity anymore. They're measuring nanofarads instead of microfarads. As you can see, they should be 220 microfarads, but they're nowhere near that. So replacing these might fix it, especially this 3.3 volt one. Over here I've got a voltage supply of 3.3 volts, and I've replaced these with temporary capacitors just for the time being, and put 3.3 volts onto here, and yeah, the board is powered up now and seems to be running. So first thing I would suggest is just replace these, and you may be in luck. Otherwise you need to feed it from a separate 3.3 volt supply here to get it to work again. The hardest bit will be sealing it back up and installing a new power supply outside of the box, which I might put inside another enclosure. So I've just got another board here. I replaced the 3.3 volt capacitor with a larger one, and the board doesn't want to power on at all. There's a green light that comes up here to show that it's on, but there's nothing. And I've measured 0 volts on the 3.3 volt line, and 5 volts here, so it's still getting 5 volts. But yeah, I think the step down converter for the 3.3 volts chip is dead or dying. That's why it couldn't boot up. So I suggest just putting a new capacitor here for 3.3 volts of at least the original, which was 220 microfarads. Over here I've got a 1000 microfarad, which seems to be working fine. So yeah, replace it with a 1000 microfarad, bigger the better, and feed 3.3 volts between ground and VCC. VCC is positive. You can probably tap into the 24 volts off one of these pads here. Just measure it with your multimeter, find 0 volts and 24 volts, and wire the 24 volts into the input of your step down converter. Set this to 3.3 volts and then hook up the 3.3 volts to the pads down here, and yeah, you should be good to go. Just to follow up, replacing these capacitors doesn't fix the problem. You don't actually need that one, I don't think. You just need to replace the 3.3 volt one with something larger than 220. That doesn't seem to work because my power supply is not quite strong enough. So I suggest you get a larger capacitor. This 1000 microfarad capacitor works good for me. Even hooking it on the output of the power supply seems to fix the issue where the LAN connection doesn't connect. It's just because there's not enough current feeding the 3.3 volts over here. So you can put a capacitor in parallel there or in here, or just put a larger capacitor here, and it will start working again. In the end, I just double-sided taped the 3.3 volt capacitor right there, and then fed these wires through this hole which I drilled like that, and then this little 24 volt to 3.3 volt converter will sit, well, it'll be connected up once the wires are through this hole, and it will sit right inside there. Yeah. Try and drop the voltage from the 5 volt line, which is on the corner of this capacitor here. There's a pad, and drop the voltage from 5 volts to 3.3 volts. It's very hacky. It is working. I've got exactly the right volt drop here. I've got a very low forward voltage diode here. I think it's like 0.3 volts, and then 0.6 or 0.7 volt forward drop between these. So yeah, it works out to about exactly 3.3 volts here, and then from here I've put a capacitor, 1000 microfarad capacitor between the ground and the voltage here, which is 3.3 volts as well, and I've just wrapped it up, and I'm going to package this in here, this capacitor next to this, so that it fits in the recess there in the housing. So yeah, that's the power and that's the light. So I think there's some sort of issue with the 3.3 volt voltage regulator, and that's why it eventually dies and keeps rebooting over and over again. Yep. The next